Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to our next episode of What's on Your Workbench. Hey there, everybody. I am Chili, and with me, as always, my friend from across the world in Australia is Andrew.
Morning, afternoon, good day, everybody, or I guess I could say g'day. Hello, how's everybody going? It's been another epic week on my workbench. I love looking across here because, again, this is why I thought of this podcast. Is that my evening is a complete mess because I'm mid-project and I have a lot of interesting questions for Chili this week about how to do things correctly as opposed to the way that I'm currently doing them. So I think we should just dive straight in. And last week was obviously a bit of a special episode. So Chili, what is it you have this week on your workbench?
Well, I also had a massive mess on my workbench. I got a little scattered in my approach to a couple different projects. And so I had to take a time out and clean things. But once I got things clean, I was able to finish off this, which is the urn. I don't know if I can get, oh, there we go, get it in the light correctly. You can see the name carved in the top. So it ended up being about 13 pounds.
Wow.
It's a little hefty.
And so for those of you that are just listening, this is the box that Chili was working on a couple episodes back. It's solid metal. It's what 9 inches by 7 inches or something like that, and then what 6 inches high?
It's about 10 inches long by 6.5 wide by 5.5 tall. And the metal is 1/4-inch plate steel, and the wood is elm with a maple inlay in the top, into which I chip carved the person's name.
Very good.
Yeah,
looks absolutely beautiful. So I guess
thank you.
Last time we saw that, it was just a box, and you were finishing off the finish on the metal. I guess, how did you finish off the wood and the paint on that? I know you were planning on, I believe, a spray paint bronze finish. But yeah, I guess let's go and just go a little bit more into detail because I am interested in the inlay and how that works as well. So yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah. So the metal is it is a sprayed bronze, Venetian bronze paint. And once I got that sprayed it with multiple coats of a clear as well. And then that's wet sanded down to 600 grit. And then there's 3 levels of what's called a cut and buff. So the same thing you do on a car, essentially. So there's 2 different abrasive grits that you go through, and then after that final abrasive grit, you wax it. So it's a very similar process to the wood as well. The elm was sanded down. Well, it was hit with a card scraper, which is almost like a really, really fine plane. You don't have to sand before you finish if your last stuff you do on wood is with a plane or a scraper. That prepares the wood best of any option. That's the best option for preparing wood for finish. So I scraped it and then put on a seal coat or a base coat, which just seals up the pores of the wood. And after that, you can do your first top coat, which in this case was an oil varnish blend again. After that cures, the first top coat, then you can hit it with 220 grit sandpaper, because even though we sealed those pores of the wood, after the first top coat, it'll lift the grain a little bit. So you have these little rough spots. So you just hit it with 220 grit to smooth those down so that it feels good on your fingertips. and then keep doing your top coats. There was a total of 4 top coats on this to get a nice lustery finish, and then finished it off with some paste wax.
That's very good, very good. I mean, when we get to what I'm working on, I do have a few questions, but I think we might wait till I show you what I've done, and I want your opinion on a few things. But no, that's great, and it's good to know that what I'm doing isn't completely wrong, because yeah, I do. That's what I've done in the past. Is you notice that first layer, it goes real rough, and you're like, what just happened there? And it makes sense that those pores are absorbing differently, and you have to go back in and sand it off. And I've noticed that when I don't put in that extra sand layer, that it's not as good. So it turns out the less work you put in, the worse the finish. But I want to know about the chip carving and how you inlaid, because you see on the internet these fancy ones where they go through and they they use a CNC and they have those crazy things. But I am curious to know how this works, and like whether you're using a veneer for that, or how does that all work?
Apologies for that. My internet is not very good. It doesn't like the rain, so you get the lovely inside house, and you will probably get some inside noises, but we will deal with that. So Chili, I was asking you about the inlay on the top there. So you've got that nice maple inlaid in there. So how did you go through that process?
Yeah, so as you know, there are no fancy CNCs or anything like that in my shop. It's just these and old school hand tools. So the first thing I did was cut my maple to size, and that's a 3/4 inch thick piece of wood that I started with. I adhered that to the elm with some double-sided tape just to hold it in place. And then you trace out the shape with a marking knife. So the reason you use a marking knife instead of like a pencil or pen or something like that is that that knife severs the fibers of the wood exactly where you want your hole to be, which gives you a nice sharp 90-degree shoulder. And that means that when you get the wood in, it'll be a seamless transition, nice and smooth. So after I got that marked out, I just took hammer and chisel and removed my waste material down to about a 1/2 inch. So that way I had a 1/4 inch sticking proud of my elm, and then shaved that down with hand planes to get it perfectly smooth and in line with the elm. So once I had that done, then it was time to do the chip carving. And chip carving is a very specific type of carving. It's a set of specific tools and techniques for doing essentially kind of like relief carving, only, well, I guess not really. It's not really relief carving. It's just its own thing. And it's commonly used for numbers and letters. Same kind of thing you see in like tombstones. But all I did was took my words, had them written out, and then used, "Hey buddy, how's it going?" And then I used carbon paper to transfer that onto the maple. And then you just take, I don't think I have the knives here with me, or I'd show you. But it's just a very steady, slow process to remove that material, because you want to do it in one pass.
Okay.
Because the more times your knife goes into the wood, the worse it's going to look.
So is it more like a chisel, or is it more like a knife, or is it kind of like a shaped blade?
It's the blade itself almost looks like a half moon. So you have this very straight blade. In the back of the knife is curved like this. And it's only about probably 3/4 of an inch, 16 mil in length.
And so you basically move it along your shape, and then you get whatever shape you want, and you pretty well try and get it in one go.
Yeah. So if you have, let's see, like if you have a straight line, like the upright on this M, you bring the blade in at about a 55 to 65 degree angle, and you cut down this side, and then you do the same thing from the other side. So it creates a V, and that's the chip that comes out.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I've ever really seen closely on how that process works.
It's amazing. The other thing that it's commonly used for is geometric design. And there are some folks out there that just have some really mind-blowing stuff. Um, this kind of technique of carving is actually pretty widespread across the world, and it's found in many different cultures through history, but it's really prevalent in Scandinavian cultures.
Okay.
Is where you'll find it a lot, and they use it to decorate things like, hand carved spoons,
Yeah.
and just, I mean, almost any and every
Everything.
object you can think of. Yeah, it's cool.
They got too much time up there. Winters are too long.
Yep.
Oh, very good, very good. It's interesting. I had something different in mind. You know, that's always fascinating learning new techniques like that.
Yeah. So, what is it that's on your workbench, Andrew?
Well, it's no longer on my workbench because it's now on the dining room table. But so you're aware of this, and some other people might be, but I'm enjoying learning how to do watercolor painting. So I'm not very good, but every year I like to paint some pictures of my children for my wife for Mother's Day. And it's kind of like a nice growing history of not only what they look like, but also as my skills develop. And this year we were planning on traveling over the next couple of weeks. And so I wanted to take all of my watercoloring stuff with me, and also just for storage at the moment, all of our paints, like the kids' craft paints and acrylics, and it's all just kind of mixed into one area. And I wanted to kind of streamline that. And I've got over the years a bit more, more paintbrushes, more paints. So I just wanted to kind of streamline my storage for that particular hobby. Now, those of you familiar with my work, I actually, when it comes to a hobby, it's not that I love the hobby that I do, but I actually enjoy all of the additional stuff around the hobby. So last year, I've got one bonsai that, gets pruned once a year. So therefore I felt it was necessary to make a full box, working toolkit for it, because that's just how I roll. So what I wanted to do was do a similar thing for my paints, is make a box which has all of my tools in it, so I can just grab that box, and if we're going away for the weekend and I just want to grab it and I can do some, and it's got everything I need. So again, being our house, my wife collects insects, and she did an entomology course at university, and as part of that she had to present a collection. And so to do that, she purchased a box, an insect collection box. So it has, it's a beautiful box which has cork in the bottom of it, and you can pin insects out and store them in it. And when she was doing that, the lecturer offered her an old box that was tattered and falling apart. And so she used that as well. And for many years, she had both boxes going. And so what happened is she was consolidating her collection and just realized, oh, I'm just using the one nicer box and I don't really need the other box. So I was like, oh, that's a nice box. I'm not going to throw that out. So I grabbed it. And basically, here is what it is looking like halfway through. So when it started off, I don't believe it's pine. I've obviously stained it now, but it was some generic wood. I don't think it was anything particularly special, with a plywood, probably a 1/4 inch ply. No, wouldn't be that much. 1/8 inch ply base on it. And it was all kind of chipping and falling apart. The veneers were coming apart, or the layers were coming apart on the plyboard. So I decided to rescue it, and I was like, what am I going to do? So first thing I did was obviously sanded it back, just to kind of clean it up. But then I actually tried something. I had this idea of, how the trendy thing is to have the resin art, where you've got you have the clear and stuff. I'm like, oh, that'd look really cool. Like these chips, I can have them clear, and I can have it so it's flat, but then you get this, you can see the history through it, epic idea. But it didn't quite actually work. So I didn't have any resin. So I just used some 5-minute epoxy, but this is the one, I believe. So you can't really see it, but this here is actually epoxy. but it's perfectly smooth. And so what I should have done, hindsight, is I should have stained it first, sealed it at least once, and then probably put the epoxy in, the resin in. But I did it before all of that. So when I stained it, it kind of picked up some of that stain and the sanding and all that kind of stuff. And I wasn't going to polish it down to anything crazy. So it actually looks like it's blended in. And so, yeah, I stained it. And now what I'm working on is the inside. So this is going to be the lid. And I've got felt inlay. You can see there. And so, yeah, the top's going to have all of my paper, as well as the flicky thing for mixing colors. Palette.
Very technical term.
Well, it's more important to make the box than to actually learn the proper terminology. And then the other side will have all my paints and a bit of water and paint brushes and things like that. So, see if on this one here I can show you a little bit more in detail. Brush noises. Oh, I can't even tell which one it is now. That's a good sign.
That means you did a good job.
Because there was a whole edge of about 1/8 of an inch that was stripped off, and I just filled it in with resin with a bit of tape, like painter's tape, and then I just peeled the painter's tape off and then sanded it all, and yeah, it came out much better than I was expecting. But so now that I've shown you how I butchered the art of woodworking, I did have a couple questions for you when it comes to repairing old plywood. So I did have an option of, I was thinking maybe I just take that plywood off and cut a new top and just do that. But as was kind of discussed on previous episodes, I like having that history. I love having that roughness of like, well, how did it get, like, you can't just buy this look off the shelf. So what I did is I kind of just peeled up what I could and squeezed as much PVA or wood glue in as I could, and then just compressed it down. And I actually used, for the first time I've ever used baking paper to kind of put on top so it wouldn't stick. And that worked really well. But is that the technique that you would use to kind of recover that plywood, or would you be more inclined to use like a resin? Or I guess, what are your thoughts on how you would do that?
So on something like that, of that caliber, historic importance, I think you took the same approach I would. It's not really necessarily worth some of the other techniques that are involved in furniture, restoration. So, I mean, I don't do a ton of furniture restoration, primarily because I don't enjoy it that as much. And I did not go into business for myself to do stuff that I don't like doing. So I don't do a ton of it. When I do, it's because I'm a sucker for a story. And if somebody has a piece that has a great story and it's obviously important to them, I'll do that. Because a lot of times other people won't. Other craft workers are like, well, this isn't, a high-end piece. I'm not going to do it. So those folks who do a lot of furniture restoration, they will have the most massive and ridiculous assortment of veneers in their shop. And the reason for that is that what they would do for something like this, where the veneer is peeled off and you got part of it that's there, part of it that's not, is they would actually cut out the parts that are bad of just the veneer, which is not necessarily easy to do. You can use you can use essentially like a razor blade, but they make specific ones for doing this kind of veneer work where it's only a single bevel. So both sides aren't beveled. It's straight on one side and only beveled on one. And again, that helps you get that really tight line. So you cut out, and the tricky thing is you never cut out a recognizable shape. So you don't cut out a square. You use irregular shapes to help kind of blend in as much as possible. And then you can take and do like a rubbing to get your line. And then you use that and transfer it onto a piece of veneer that as closely matches the wood grain as possible. And that's why those folks have this, immense collection of veneers, because they'll just sort through until they find something that's a close match. Then they trace it out on the veneer, cut it out, get it fine tuned so that it fits real nice and tight, and then glue that in. And really the best way to get that adhesion is with a vacuum bag. So you put your glue in, you put your glue on, put your veneer in, and you put it in a pouch that seals and is attached to a vacuum pump, which sucks all the air out and clamps everything down perfectly even and consistent. That's the real high end way to do that.
Okay.
I don't have a vacuum bag. I would use, probably like you did, I'd use parchment paper with a flat either board or piece of sheet steel, and then weight it to get that even, consistent kind of pressure.
Yep. Okay, so I wasn't too far off then.
No, and you'll see that the resin approach for those areas that are missing or chipped or stuff like that, that's a fairly modern approach, simply because resins have come a long way in the past 10-15 years, and it's much more feasible to do that and do it in a way that looks nice than it was 20 years ago. So there's nothing wrong with that approach at all. Of course, there are some purists who would argue with me and say, no, that's horrible. It's just a different way to do it. And it's up to the craft worker, or the maker or the artisan or whoever, to determine what's right for them and what's right for that piece and what's right for your client.
Yep.
That's a huge part, is what's right for your client.
Well, this client has exceedingly low standards, so we are good to go. He's going to get what he pays that client, so we will be all good. But yeah, no, and I guess the other question, I had a couple more questions. How do you decide when to use a stain and when to just go with like a varnish? Because this one, I was really on the edge of like, do I stain it or do I just leave it natural? I mean, depends on what you want to call natural. Stain is still kind of a natural finish, but I was really on the fence because I really, like on a modern wood, I like that nice clean white, really light look. But, stain does just give it that nice richness, that nice rich color that you can see on this one. So I guess for me, it usually just comes down to how much of my imperfections I need to hide, or it depends on kind of what I'm using that piece for. Sometimes, like, I think the darker color might make that piece look better, but is there any process, or do you kind of have a preference for just keeping it natural? I guess, what's your attitude towards stains? Let's get the deep questions.
So I'm kind of a jerk about stain, I'll be honest. And this is 100% personal preference.
Absolutely.
That's all it is. There's no science behind this. There's nothing. It's just personal preference and aesthetics. I will only use stain on cheap wood, like pine, maybe poplar. I really appreciate the tones and the character of wood. And so when I'm doing a project, I mean, I generally try to select my wood accordingly for those tones that I want. And I generally will not stain something. There are a couple of there's a couple of caveats to that, or times when I will. For instance, I made a large cabinet for a client it used to be a kitchen cabinet, is what it started out as. It was a 10-foot long kitchen cabinet.
Wow.
This guy had all of his audio equipment on. So vintage 60s, hi-fi setup, turntable, gorgeous Danish modern speakers, the whole thing. I cut it down and turned it into a cabinet to hold his records, to hold all the accoutrement for his collection. And we wanted it to match the Danish modern speakers, which were done in walnut. Well, getting that much walnut was way outside of my client's budget. I mean, it's a lot of wood, and a lot of not cheap wood.
Yeah, I
So
understand
what
that.
I did. Yeah.
For my children, we bought a walnut Swedish designed high chair. And at one point, that was the most expensive piece of furniture in our dining room and living room combined, all because I saw it online and I just went, I can't do anything else. I've seen that walnut. So whenever I think about walnut, that's what I think of. And I go, I'm just going to use the pine and stain it.
Yep. So what I did was I used elm because it has a very similar grain structure to walnut. And then I stained it walnut.
Yep.
So, I mean, when you look at it initially, you just think it's walnut, and it matches the speakers beautifully. So there are a few times that I will, but generally I prefer to let wood be what it is. And that's purely my aesthetic and my preference as a craftsman.
Yeah, and I mean, you're using, a wide variety of woods, and I think if I'm doing something newer, I mean, for me, a lot of it's to do with size. The bigger it is, the less I like to stain it, just because getting that even stain is, me. And while on a small thing like this, it's like, oh yeah, I've got space, I can get it, and I, enjoy ruining t-shirts with stains. So it's definitely a smaller project thing. Is how I that's usually how I approach it. Or if I'm trying to match something, obviously that's the other thing. And I guess for me, pretty well, I always end up using a walnut stain. I have tried a couple other colors, but usually I just come back to having a walnut stain on my shelf is usually, I find, the most useful stain to have. It seems to solve most of my problems.
So here's a question for you. Did you do anything to the wood prior to staining?
I sanded it. I think I might have wiped it down with some methylated spirits or terps or something. Maybe.
Yep.
Maybe I didn't. I can't remember. It was a long time ago.
Here is the fun little trick to getting even stain easily.
Okay.
Super easy.
Where have you been all my life, Chili?
Before you stain, you want to do a base coat. Okay. You actually, as weird as this sounds, you want to seal the wood before you stain.
Okay, but I'm guessing you're not using a polyurethane varnish.
No. The best thing to use, what I recommend, is shellac.
Okay.
And the reason for that is shellac is an almost universal binder, meaning that it will adhere to a myriad of different finishes, whereas others won't. So if you use varnish, varnish won't adhere to some water-based stains or things like that. Shellac will.
Okay.
So I usually will do a shellac coat first, and not straight. I cut it usually 2 or 3 to 1, so pretty thin. I cut my shellac, and you put that on just to get everything nice and sealed. And then when you go over that with your stain, and you can use an oil-based or a water-based stain, you will get a wonderfully even coat, and it's a lot easier to work it too. Because unlike going over bare wood where you have to worry about lap marks and all that stuff, you can go over it and then you can wipe over it, with a rag and help kind of blend everything the way you want it.
Okay.
And then you top coat after that.
Because I've heard of primers, and I did try that, but I couldn't find I wasn't happy with how it all worked out. But a shellac I'm sure is a lot easier to find on that.
have, let's see here. Here's an example of what you can find in the store. So this is from Minwax. It's a pre-stain wood conditioner. So they claim that, this will help you even out those, odd spots. This is garbage.
Yeah, the one I couldn't find an exact one of that in here in Australia, but the version that I found, I was not that happy with. But yeah, well, like having the exact name, like, a shellac is a defined product. That's, I'm sure that's a lot easier to find.
This will work a little bit better, a sanding sealer, because it is actually a seal coat. So if you, want to find something straight off the shelf, a sanding sealer will work okay. General Finishes has something called Seal-A-Cell, which works really well as well for a kind of base coat. But I find that just using shellac is nice because I use shellac for other things. And so it's a nice universal thing to have. I try to have as few products in my shop as I can.
I agree that because for me, I don't always use it. So, if there's something I can use for multiple projects, it's good to just grab it rather than having one specific tool sitting there. And then by the time I use it, it's gone off. So obviously I went in then with a varnish coat, and to get a good gloss, I'm a sucker for an oil-based varnish. You just can't replicate that with I find the water-based ones just aren't as good. How important is it? On the instructions, it always says to cut that first coat. I'm going to be honest, and this is going to shock everybody. I think I've done that once. How important is that, and what difference does that actually make?
Okay. It's incredibly important. And
you were going to say that.
The difference it makes is the quality and smoothness of your final product. The other thing it does is it greatly reduces the amount of time that you have to wait between coats.
Yep.
So like the paddle boards, for instance, or a wood strip kayak canoe, something like that. You use a varnish on those, and you use marine varnish on them because that has a UV protectant in it. And if you try to brush that stuff on straight, one, it is so dang thick. Like it's impossible to get smooth, and you get, lap marks and brush marks. And I mean, it's wretched. So what you do is you cut it, and you cut it progressively less with each coat you do. So like I'll start out my first coat, my seal coat, I'll do a 3-to-1. So 1 part varnish to 3 part solvent. And I literally wipe it on with a rag. Like I wipe it on and I come back over it then with a dry rag and wipe off my excess. And it is so easy to do. I mean, it's like idiot proof. It's fantastic. So you get your first coat on like that. Then my second coat, I'll go to a 2-to-1. And usually what I'll just do is I'll just add a little more varnish to, what I have made. And I use, I use kitchen containers like this. So this is an oil varnish blend in here. So it's, I did my final coat, so it's 1-to-1-to-1. So varnish, linseed oil, and odorless mineral spirits. So I'll start off with like my 3-to-1 in this, and then I'll just add a little bit more varnish to it to make it thicker, do my second coat, and then I'll do like a 1-to-1 for my final coat. So that solvent evaporates off really quickly, which then means that instead of waiting 24 hours plus before I can do my second coat, I can wait like 3-4 hours. And then do my second coat. Obviously, that depends on your temperature, humidity levels, all that stuff. But it drops down that time massively. So like for a paddleboard, that I can take if I'm just using varnish straight, that would be like a 4 or 5 day process for finishing that board. And I can bring it down to doing it in a day, day and a half, and get a much better looking product at the end.
Oh, awesome. I think you've converted me to try and do it properly next time. We'll see if that actually happens. All right.
Yeah,
well,
here's the one other tip I'm going to give you about working with varnish. So varnish it's a type of finish that cures via oxidation. So the more it's exposed to the air, it hardens and cures. So what you want to do, the reason I use these is because I take out only the amount of varnish I need to put in this, and then put my lid back on the varnish right away. And that helps keep that varnish fresh for longer. You can actually even get some aerosol cans that basically just have gases in them which are heavier than air or heavier than oxygen, and you can spray them in so it displaces the oxygen out of your container before you put the lid back on, so it keeps it from oxidizing at all.
Oh, yeah, I usually just try and buy small containers. All right, it sounds like the house is waking up. So I think we might hold it there. I did have one more question about the felting and flocking and your experience with that, but we may save that for another week because I'm sure at some point...
Just go for it.
Okay,
just go for it.
Okay, so I apologize for the background noise. So I'm obviously using felt, but I am curious, have you ever used flocking for the inside of like a jewelry box or any of those techniques? Because I've never used it and I'm very curious to attempt it one day, but I was curious if you ever have.
I actually haven't.
Okay.
I've been curious about it myself. I've used velvet before, is all I've ever done.
Okay, and was that like,
but never,
was that applied with just kind of like the way I would have done the felt? Like, was it, when you say velvet,
probably,
like a solid piece?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just a solid piece, and like essentially rubber cement, contact cement. It's the best way to get a good even finish that doesn't bleed through and then make your velvet look like crushed velvet unintentionally.
Yep. Yeah, I was using spray adhesive for mine just because that's the quickest. Yep. But yeah, okay. So I guess I do have a plan in mind one day to redo a jewelry box for my wife, and I want to try that flocking technique. So we'll get to that then at another date. But
nice.
Awesome. All right.
Well, all right. So what's coming up on your workbench?
Well, mainly just finishing this. Obviously, there's a lot of internal structure that still needs to go. So it'll probably be working on this, and then I'll actually probably start working on some paintings for Mother's Day. Will probably be the next thing I start kind of working on, because before we know it, that will be upon us. And then there's a few other little things that are ongoing as usual. But yeah, there's nothing actually too defined at the moment. This is kind of the big one.
All right.
How about you? I heard there was something in the works.
There is. This is your hint.
Ooh, I want to say a rocking chair or a rocking horse.
Yep. We'll see.
We'll see. Oh, I can't wait.
Yep. This delightfully curved piece of oak is all you're getting for now.
Oh, I can't wait. All right. Well, obviously this episode we're going to have to chop a little bit, but I think we got there in the end with internet issues, loud children discussing the latest Pokemon news. So we will catch you next week, or I think we might be having a bit of a break. We will see. We will talk about that in a second. We will see and find out what's on your workbench next week.